hello. Hopefully, your day is going good and you're ready to hear a couple things that I'd like to discuss. One thing that I'm really excited about is that I took a handwritten book and made a digital copy of it to make it more available. What I'm trying to do is attract as many veterans in the state of Maryland who are religious and are very concerned about Baltimore. New method of prayer to try and unite and come together in order to lift the people of Baltimore to our God. And if you're like me, prayer can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge. What can I give God advice? Or this all powerful being, will he give me audience? So many other dynamics that are involved with prayer that it's very tricky for me at times to get into a good state of mind and to harness that energy and the focus and make the time sacred. A lot of research went into drawing the circles, not on my behalf, but early on in the field of psychiatry with Carl Jung. And from what I could tell, Sigmund Freud didn't have much to say about it, but I stumbled upon it by doing a circle exercise where it was just a circle on a piece of paper, and I drew on the circle what was most important to me. And my focus at that time was on being a father. So there's a lot of background, a lot of backstory. But I think as I make more videos, I'll be able to share it more properly. But what I wanted to do with this video was to put my focus on trying to simplify the Bible and taking that simplified understanding and really directing it towards that sense of purpose, towards trying to see some results. It's very hard to be religious like I am and to really want to see change and to have nothing happen. And so at those points, I'm really confronted with the questioning the reality of God. So I've kind of been through a couple rites of passage. I took a year of my life and went and studied the Bible in upstate New York at a place called Word of Life Bible College. And it was very helpful for me to get understanding. Since then, I've deviated from that understanding that I once held while I was a student there. And life brought me to where I'm at now, where I want to bring the reality of God into a practical way of considering the needs of others. And the need in Baltimore is really great, and I'm really hopeful to see some changes. Put a Facebook group together, and this video is geared towards trying to get more people involved, more veterans, hopefully. But I don't think I'm in a place to necessarily shut anyone out, especially if they're interested and genuine in joining the group. So I'll just kind of get started with the Bible and wanting to simplify it. It can be so tricky because if I want to study the Bible on my own, I have to read through a lot of the pages, and within those pages, there seems to be backstory. And within that backstory seems to be a proper understanding of the Word of God, which is orthodox. And to stray away from the orthodox views of the Bible seems to be very looked down upon. So what I'm trying to do is to navigate around that and to say, look, let's just break the Bible down and let's just look at 5 people. And those 5 people, from there, we can see the direction and the flow of, okay, what does the Bible say about what direction the world is intended to go? What does God want for people? And so it kind of helps to have a little bit of a background of understanding. So the 5 people I wanted to start with one was going to be Abraham. The next is Moses. After that came David. After David came Jesus, and then Paul. And the way that these people mentioned seemed to pass a baton like a relay race. Like they kind of took the connection with God and advanced it in a certain way to the point where everybody in the world has at least heard of the Bible or heard of a religious text. Within that, there are so many variations and so many opinions out there. So keeping it between these 5 people is really helpful. With Abraham, God promised a big family with a big home. God promised Abraham he'd have so many kids that they'd become a nation. And he promised a region of land that Abraham would inherit as a promise from God that for his family nation to live in. Then you have it go from Abraham to Moses. And with Moses, he constructed the nation with laws and set parameters for it to one day have permission, even though God didn't intend it, a way for the nation to have a king. So Abraham, a family, a land; Moses, laws, and a kingdom. Then came King David, who took a nation of laws set with a kingdom and became the king of Israel. And David received certain promises that his kids, his descendants, would rule Israel for all time. That it gets a little hazy here, but we'll try our best. For one of his kids, it promised that he would become a priest after the order of Melchizedek, however you want to say it. And that was something that was a really powerful promise. So for David, he was the king of Israel, had a promise that his descendants would rule Israel as kings, and that one of his kids would become a priest that was a son of God, like a very having a lot of authority, and that's called the Messiah, the one that would pretty much rule, having that channel open up for God to dwell among man through this Messiah. So David was a really, I guess you can kind of say like an exciting figure in the Bible. Um, it was a big deal for Israel as a nation to have this king and this promise of a Messiah who would be a priest and bring forth uh, the the true balance and and reign of good. Then after David came Jesus, and it's tricky here because there's a difference between Jewish people and Christian people and how we look at it. Because for Christians, Jesus is the Messiah, is the promised one that was channeled through David. And that's where Jews break from Christians because there's a disagreement there. But historically, or a better word for it, according to the literature, we're looking at Jesus as the one who took the baton from David and was developing the nation of Israel under this allegiance to God, that it would kind of go back to an earlier promise that was under Moses where God was like, I want you to be a nation of priests, to where it's like everyone, it's kind of like in the Marine Corps, every Marine's a rifleman. Well, it's kind of like that. Every citizen of Israel would be a priest, would have that power. And Jesus early on was also known as the Lamb of God. So he would bring about this atonement and open up that avenue for God to reign on earth. Then after Jesus came Paul, who reflected on that message. And up to the time of Paul, the Bible was very direct between God and Israel. I'm a little hazy on this because from what I understand, there's a difference between Hebrews, between Israelites, and Jews. For some people, it's all the same thing, but for others, it's a very big conversation that I just now displayed maybe a little bit of ignorance with by broaching the subject. But at least it's out there that there was a difference. But the thing is that it was just one type of people that God was dealing with, and it wasn't the Greeks, or it excluded whole nations. And so up to the time of Paul and Peter, and Jesus, because there was a time where he did a miracle for someone who was non-Jewish, and there was the whole message behind that. And it's kind of peppered throughout the Bible of times where God reached out to people who were not in that specific group, that there's this strong interaction between God and the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jews. But the big deal with Paul was that he kind of took the baton from his predecessors and he handed it to us. He made it possible for people who weren't in that original group to celebrate God, the God of the original group. So it's kind of tricky, but it's a little bit of a short way to remember we're thinking of Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, and Paul. Abraham, a family and a land. Moses, a nation of laws and the setting the backdrop for a kingdom. David, the king of Israel, with the promises of authority for his descendants and the coming Messiah. Jesus, the fulfillment of those promises. Then Paul, taking those promises and allowing non-Jews, non-Hebrews, non-Israelites to pick up the baton and celebrate God as their own. So whereas the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jews would look back to Abraham, people who were not part of that group would look to Jesus. And so there's a lot of questions in there and a lot of theology and interpretations that people go to college for years, and it's still a very tricky subject to navigate. But just wanting to keep those people in mind: Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, and Paul, pretty much taking the idea of God and making it a global masterpiece. So we have that idea, we have that concept, and what I've done is I've taken the Bible and really looked through it and said, okay, God promised these things to the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jews, and I want to see those of us who have taken up the baton and to channel those promises that are from Israel, and to see if we can channel those promises to a place, to Baltimore, to the people of Baltimore. There's a psalm that pretty much says, "May it go well with those who devote themselves to the well-being of Jerusalem." And I just think that it would be really amazing of God to where it would be like, what can we say? May it go well with those who consider the well-being of Baltimore. And there are other cities that are in need, but in my mind, if we take time and really devote our spiritual energy to one place, to liberate that one place, then maybe those who are liberated in that place can go to other areas that are still under oppression, violence, and chaos, and make that place a better place. The example I'm thinking of in history, Harriet Tubman, thinking, man, what if it was the angels in heaven was like, if we just had this one person liberated, what she would do for thousands of other slaves. And so it's the same idea. Like if we could just get this one city that's under such, I don't know the word for it, under such distress, but that's not quite the word. If we can channel the powers of God to liberate Baltimore, can we still hope for peace in other places in the world? And I think the answer is yes. And so I wanted to get started by using this book. The digital copy is now available, and I really enjoyed drawing the shapes, coloring them, spending time in silence, and really considering the scriptures and a short prayer to really meditate on while I would draw and color. And what you can do is, if you want to join the effort, you can simply take the book, observe it. There's a little story in the Bible of way back when there was this work of art that people could look at and they could be healed. It, it was it was a beautiful story. Well, it was it was one of those stories that was kind of harsh, but then at the same time, it had its beauty to it. But they looked at the work of art and they were healed from poisonous bite from a serpent. So it's kind of like the same idea. You can look at the circles and experience some type of healing if you didn't want to draw and color them, and look at the little prayer and see if your heart agrees with it based off of the verse, and spend a little time in meditation with me over Baltimore. So like I said, I'm really excited about this digital copy of the book I made. Take a look at it, see if it's something you're interested in, and consider joining the group. And we can do this together. So thank you.